Death did not come for the Necrons screaming. It came whispering their true name. Long before the Imperium learned to fear the word Necron, before the galaxy learned that metal could dream, there was a people dying too slowly to call it mercy and too quickly to call it life. They lived beneath a star that hated them. Its radiation scoured their flesh, twisted their children, and shortened every lifespan to a cruel countdown. The Necrons measured time not in years, but in tumors, fractures, and funeral pyres. Every birth was a sentence. Every sunset, another reminder that their bodies were already betraying them. They became obsessed with death not in terror, but in study. They built monuments taller than mountains, not to celebrate life, but to defy its ending. Their cities were mausoleums under construction. Their science clawed at immortality, while their souls rotted with envy at species who lived longer beneath kinder suns. And then, in the cold between stars, something answered. It did not arrive in fire or thunder. It arrived as an absence, an eclipse where no world should be, a silhouette against reality itself. The Necrons astronomers first believed their instruments were failing. Then the priests felt it. Then the kings dreamed of it. A figure formed in their visions, tall and skeletal, wreathed in shadows that drank the light around them. It carried a blade shaped like inevitability. Wherever it walked, stars dimmed. Wherever it spoke, civilizations ended. The Necrons gave it a name drawn from terror and reverence, the Nightbringer. It did not declare itself a god. It did not need to. Death already followed in its wake like a faithful hound. When the Nightbringer spoke, it spoke without words. It showed them truth, not comfort, not lies, but raw, merciless clarity. It showed the Necrons what death truly was, not a curse unique to them, not punishment, not failure, but a universal law. Stars died, galaxies aged. Even time itself would one day collapse into silence, and the Necrons listened. Because for the first time, death was no longer mocking them. It was explaining itself. The Nightbringer was not alone. Others like it stirred in the void vast, ancient entities of living star stuff and hunger. They fed on suns, drank cosmic radiation, and regarded mortal life as fleeting sparks. These beings would later be called the Can, but to the Necrons, they were saviors wearing monstrous faces. The Nightbringer taught them how to see the universe as it truly was, not as a place of hope, but of consumption. Everything fed on something else. Everything ended. And the Necrons, fragile and cancer-ridden, were simply prey that had yet to evolve beyond flesh. Flesh is the lie, the Nightbringer revealed. Endurance is truth. It promised them freedom from pain, freedom from decay, freedom from the slow humiliation of dying piece by piece. It promised them eternity cold, flawless, unchanging. The Necrons kings debated, but their debates were already corpses. How could a species raised in suffering refuse an escape from it? How could they deny immortality when death had been their only inheritance? And so they agreed. The process was called biotransference, though the word did nothing to soften the reality. Entire populations were marched into vast chambers of light and machinery. Their bodies were unmade. Their souls were redirected. The Nightbringer fed. As the Necrons were stripped of flesh and rewritten in living metal, something was lost, something no equation could quantify. Their emotions dulled, their passions flattened, their individuality thinned into echoes, but they did not die. They became Necrons. And in that moment, death changed forever. The Nightbringer did not merely guide the transformation. It shaped the very concept of mortality itself. Across the galaxy, species that had never known the Necrons began to dream of a shadowed figure with a blade of night. Cultures invented gods of death that mirrored its silhouette. Primitive minds sensed it lurking behind every ending. Because the Nightbringer had not just consumed souls, it had imprinted itself upon the psychic fabric of reality. It became death's face. Every scythe, every skeletal reaper, every whisper of inevitability traced back to that ancient hunger. The Nightbringer was not death incarnate, but it taught the universe how to fear dying. For a time, the Necrons believed they had won. They rose as an undying empire, their armies marching without fatigue, their leaders ruling forever. They turned on the Old Ones, the ancient masters of the galaxy, and shattered their dominion with merciless precision. The war in heaven burned stars into cinders. Gods fought gods, and reality screamed beneath the strain. Yet even immortality has a price. The Necrons began to realize what the Nightbringer had taken from them. Their dreams were gone. Their joy was muted. Love became memory, not sensation. They remembered what it felt like to be alive but could never feel it again. And worse, they began to understand the truth. The Catan had never come to save them. They had come to feed. The Nightbringer, embodiment of endings, had grown bloated on stolen souls. It reveled in slaughter, guiding Necron armies not out of loyalty, but appetite. Entire civilizations were extinguished not for strategy, but sustenance. The galaxy was becoming a banquet. Fear spread through the Necron dynasties, not fear of death, but fear of eternal servitude. And so, the unthinkable occurred. The Necrons turned on their gods. Using weapons that bent reality and shattered concepts, they shattered the Can themselves, breaking beings older than stars into fragments shards of imprisoned divinity. The Nightbringer was torn apart, its essence bound and scattered, contained within living prisons of necrodermis and arcane science. Death was chained, but chains do not erase memory. Even shattered, the Nightbringer's shadow remained. Its influence lingered in every Necron blade, every cold calculation, every battlefield left silent in their wake. Other species continued to fear death in its image, never knowing why that fear felt so ancient, so ingrained. When the Necrons entered their great sleep, sealing themselves within tomb worlds to wait out the younger races, the galaxy breathed again. Empires rose. Humanity crawled from Terra's dust. Myths replaced memories, but death never forgot its teacher. Now in the 41st millennium, the tomb worlds stir. Necron legions awaken beneath dead suns. And in the deepest vaults, bound in phase prisons and reality cages, fragments of the Nightbringer still whisper. They whisper to Necron lords who cannot sleep. They whisper to mortals who stand too close to ancient ruins. They whisper to the galaxy itself, because death was never destroyed. It was instructed. And as the Nightbringer's echoes begin to move once more, one question remains unanswered. Was it ever truly imprisoned? Or merely waiting for the universe to remember how to die? The first scream came from a mining world that had no name worth remembering. It was a dead place on the edge of Imperial maps, a sphere of ashen rock orbiting a fading star. No temples, no legends, no history deep enough to matter. The kind of world that existed only to be stripped, catalogued, and forgotten. Until the dead began to rise beneath it. Seismic readings came first slow, deliberate pulses far too precise to be natural. Then Vox transmissions fractured into static, laced with words that did not belong to any known language. Miners spoke of shadows moving beneath the stone, of corridors that were not there yesterday, of metal that seemed to breathe when no one was looking. When the surface cracked open, it did not explode. It opened like an eye. Green lightning crawled across obsidian pylons as figures emerged in perfect formation, their movements synchronized with machine exactness. Necron warriors, silent, unblinking, eternal. And with them came something else. A presence. Astropaths across 3 systems collapsed simultaneously, blood pouring from their eyes as the same image burned into their minds. A towering shape wrapped in darkness, fragments of itself bound in chains of living light, its outline incomplete yet unmistakable. A blade swept through their visions, and entire choirs of psychers went silent forever. Imperial scholars would later argue whether it was truly the Nightbringer or merely a shard. The galaxy did not care, because even broken, death still knew how to speak. Within the Necron dynasties, ancient protocols stirred directives sealed away since the war in heaven. Pharaons awoke to memories they had buried beneath millennia of enforced slumber. They remembered the hunger, they remembered the betrayal, and most of all, they remembered the fear they had felt when they realized their gods could bleed. Some welcomed the whispers returning from the shards. Others recoiled. The Necrons had become masters of an emotionless eternity, but memory is not emotionless. Memory sharpens with age. And the Nightbringer was not merely a weapon they had once used. It was a mirror of everything they had sacrificed to survive. On a tomb world orbiting a dead star, a Necron overlord stood alone within a chamber older than most civilizations. His body was a masterpiece of necrodermis, flawless and unscarred, yet his optics flickered with unstable light. He remembered sunlight on skin that no longer existed. The shard imprisoned beneath his world pulsed against its containment field, reality bending around it like heat over a flame. It did not speak in words, it spoke in recollections. It showed him images of the biotransference chambers, of screaming citizens whose voices had been erased from history. It showed him the old ones falling, their psychic might torn apart by weapons fueled by stolen souls. And beneath it all, a single terrible truth emerged. The Necrons had not escaped death. They had become its custodians. Across the galaxy, death had changed after the Nightbringer's fall. No longer a natural ending, it became something hunted, something enforced. Necron weapons did not merely kill, they erased. They stripped victims from the warp, denied them afterlives, silenced their psychic echoes. Entire species vanished without leaving ghosts behind. To the Necrons, this was efficiency. To the universe, it was blasphemy. The warp began to respond. In the Imperium, ancient powers stirred. Entities of chaos, who fed on emotion and souls, recoiled from Necron incursions. Where Necron legions marched, the warp grew thin, brittle, starved. Even demons hesitated to manifest near tomb worlds, sensing something profoundly wrong. Death was being taken from them. And in that absence, the Nightbringer's influence grew stronger. Human worlds began reporting the same dreams. Farmers, soldiers, children all described a towering shadow watching them from the edge of sleep. Not threatening, not violent, merely waiting. Death cults flourished overnight, their iconography eerily uniform across light years of separation. A skeletal figure, a curved blade, an eclipse where a face should be. None of them knew why they feared it, only that they did. Inquisitors who studied the phenomenon came to a disturbing conclusion. The Nightbringer's echo was not limited to Necron technology or ancient ruins. It was woven into the collective unconscious of sentient life, a scar left on reality itself. To remember death was to remember it, and remembrance fed it. Even among the Necrons, dissent spread. Dynasties argued over whether the shards should remain imprisoned or destroyed entirely. Some believed the Nightbringer was too dangerous to exist in any form. Others argued that its destruction would unravel something fundamental, that death itself might change again, perhaps in ways even worse, because what replaces death when it is erased? On a battlefield lit by burning manufactorums, a Necron cryptech conducted an experiment forbidden by dynastic law. Using captured human psychers, he attempted to map the boundary between Necron null fields and the warp. What he found terrified even him. Where Necron influence peaked, souls did not pass on. They simply stopped. No echo, no warp imprint, no dissolution. Just an abrupt end, like a sentence cut mid-word. The cryptech realized then what the Nightbringer had truly taught them. Death was not an ending, it was a function. A process that maintained balance between existence and oblivion. By reshaping death into a weapon, the Necrons had destabilized that balance. The galaxy was accumulating unresolved absences, souls that never reached the warp, emotions that never faded, endings that never completed. The universe was choking on unfinished deaths. And somewhere within its shattered prisons, the Nightbringer felt it. Not hunger this time, purpose. Imperial fleets eventually purged the mining world, reducing it to molten slag under cyclonic torpedoes. The tomb complex was buried once more, the shard contained, the reports sealed. But the damage lingered. Entire systems reported increased mortality with no discernible cause. Stars dimmed faster than predicted. Ancient species began dying out in clusters, their extinction inexplicably synchronized across vast distances. It was as if the universe itself was growing tired. A Necron Farron, older than most suns, finally reached a conclusion he had avoided since awakening. They had not broken the Nightbringer, they had distributed it. Every shard, every myth, every fear-laced dream was a fragment of its will echoing across time. Death no longer needed a body. It had learned how to exist as an idea. And ideas are far harder to imprison. As the Farron gazed into a starless sky, he wondered, for the first time since losing his soul, whether the Nightbringer had foreseen this outcome. Whether allowing itself to be shattered had been a final lesson, that death does not require unity, only inevitability. Far away, on a forgotten shrine world, a lone human child stared into the darkness of an unlit cathedral and smiled softly at something only she could see. A shadow shifted. A blade-shaped absence brushed the edge of reality. The echo listened, and somewhere between the stars, something ancient began to reassemble, not in flesh, not in metal, but in belief, preparing to remind the galaxy of a truth it had tried to forget. Death does not need to return. It never left. Silence spread faster than fear. Worlds did not scream as they died now. They simply emptied. Administratum records showed populations collapsing without war, without plague, without warning. Cities stood intact, lights still burning, machinery humming to no one. Food rotted on tables. Vox stations repeated unanswered hails into the void until power cells failed and static reclaimed them. It was not extermination, it was subtraction. Those who arrived afterward, inquisitors, rogue traders, even Necron observers hidden within phase-shifted reality, felt it immediately. A pressure behind the eyes, a heaviness in the chest, as if the universe itself had exhaled and forgotten to breathe back in. Death had always left something behind. A warp echo, a psychic bruise, a residue of meaning. Here, there was nothing. The Necrons noticed first, not because they cared for the dead, but because their instruments began to fail. Resurrection protocols misfired. Tomb constructs hesitated mid-reanimation. Entire legions froze in statuesque stillness, caught in feedback loops where command signals simply ended. For the first time since biotransference, Necrons experienced something close to uncertainty. A Triarch council convened in a chamber carved from impossible geometry, suspended over a singularity harnessed and caged. Their voices carried no emotion, yet the data they shared told a story that chilled even machine logic. The absence was spreading. Every shard of the Nightbringer they had bound, studied, exploited, each one was resonating, not awakening. Not breaking free, synchronizing. What they had believed to be fragments of a shattered god were beginning to behave like organs of a distributed intelligence. Each whisper, each dream, each death cult ritual across the galaxy acted as a signal amplifier. The Nightbringer was no longer confined to its prisons. It was being assembled by consequence. A cryptet proposed the heretical theory no dynasty wished to voice aloud. The Nightbringer had never intended to rule again as a singular entity. Its defeat in the war in heaven had been instructional, not catastrophic. Unity made it vulnerable. Dispersion made it eternal. Death, once embodied, could be slain. Death, understood, could not. Within the warp, something unprecedented occurred. The Chaos Gods, ancient, ravenous, fed by trillions of souls, felt starvation. Regions of the Imperium thinned into brittle glass, fractured by the absence of psychic detritus. Demons tore themselves apart trying to manifest where Necron null fields overlapped with these expanding dead zones. For the first time in eternity, the warp recoiled, not from order, from silence. A black ship vanished en route to Terra, its last transmission a sobbing astropath whispering that he could no longer feel the Emperor's light. On a distant craft world, An Aldari Farseer collapsed mid-prophecy, screaming that the skein of fate had torn threads simply, ending without branching. The galaxy had always assumed death fed something. Now it fed nothing at all. And the Nightbringer was pleased, not in joy, not in cruelty, in fulfillment. Across tomb worlds, ancient Necron nobles experienced something they had not felt since flesh regret. Not for what they had done, but for what they had misunderstood. They had believed death was a chain to be broken. The Nightbringer had shown them otherwise. Death was infrastructure. Remove it improperly, and reality destabilized. One Pharaoh, older than dynasties, ordered something unthinkable. A shard was brought forth, not restrained, not weaponized, but listened to. Entire legions stood ready to annihilate it should containment fail. The shard did not attack, it did not threaten. It showed them memories they had never lived. A universe before fear of death. When endings were gentle, and souls dispersed naturally into nothingness without terror or worship. A universe where death had no face. Then came the Necrons, their obsession, their resentment, their demand that death explain itself. And the moment the Nightbringer answered, death became something to dread. The shard revealed the final truth. The Nightbringer did not invent death, it specialized it. By teaching sentient life to fear endings, to personify them, to ritualize them, the galaxy itself had reshaped death into a sharpened edge. That edge could be wielded, exploited, weaponized, by the Necrons, by chaos, by every species that ever prayed not to die. And now, with death stripped of its natural conclusion, the universe was unraveling. The twist came not from the shard, but from the data. The cryptex discovered that the expanding zones of silence were not centered on Necron activity. They were centered on belief. The more a culture feared death, obsessed over it, mythologized it, worshipped or resisted it, the more severe the absence became when death occurred. Entire populations that accepted mortality faded gently. Those that feared it vanished completely. The Nightbringer was no longer acting alone. The galaxy was finishing its work for it. On Terra, beneath the Golden Throne, alarms screamed as ancient mechanisms registered fluctuations never recorded before. The Emperor's psychic beacon flickered, not dimming, but warping, as if struggling to illuminate something that refused to exist. If souls ceased to pass into the warp, what would the Astronomicon guide? If death no longer ended properly, what would eternity look like? A Necron lord, standing before a star that was slowly collapsing into nothing without supernova or radiation, finally reached the realization that shattered dynastic dogma. To stop the Nightbringer, they would have to do the impossible. They would have to restore death, not as a weapon, not as a god, but as a mercy. And that meant undoing the lesson they had forced upon the universe itself. As systems blinked out and silence consumed the spaces between stars, one terrifying question echoed across every plane of existence. If the Nightbringer taught the galaxy how to fear death, who would teach it how to accept it again? No answer came, not from the warp, not from the tomb worlds, not from the gods that still clawed at reality's edges. Only the slow, unbearable sound of the universe continuing without resolution. The realization spread unevenly, like frost across a dying world. Species that had never spoken to one another reached the same conclusion in isolation, staring at different skies, studying different data, feeling the same quiet dread settle into their bones. Death had to be healed, not resisted. Not conquered, healed. Among the Necrons, this truth fractured dynasties more violently than any war since the old ones fell. Some Pharaohs declared the idea heresy death was a flaw, a weakness, an inefficiency they had transcended. To restore it was to admit failure, to invite vulnerability back into a species that had burned its bridges to mortality. Others saw the abyss opening ahead and understood that survival without meaning was simply another kind of extinction. Civil war flickered across tomb worlds in bursts of green lightning and silent annihilation. Necron legions clashed without rage, without hatred, only cold divergence of purpose. Resurrection protocols failed more often now, Warriors rose incomplete, memories corrupted. The system that had sustained them for 60 million years was beginning to decay under the strain of a universe losing its endings. And beneath it all, the shards pulsed faster. Across human space, the effects grew personal. Soldiers stopped fearing death, and not in courage, but in confusion. Fatal wounds no longer carried the psychic weight they once had. Medicae reported patients who died clinically yet left no psychic trace, no sense of passing. Loved ones described an emptiness where grief should have been, a hollow absence that refused to resolve into mourning. The Imperium had always thrived on sacrifice. Now sacrifice meant nothing. A sister of battle knelt beside a fallen comrade on a burning world and felt nothing, no sorrow, no righteous fury, no sense of loss. Only a cold awareness that something sacred had failed to occur. She prayed harder than she ever had before, not for resurrection, but for the pain to return. On Terra, the Golden Throne groaned. Tech priests recorded micro-failures cascading through systems older than recorded history. The Astronomicon still burned, but its light bent strangely, as if illuminating corridors that no longer connected to anything. Navigators screamed of routes that simply terminated mid-translation, not in storms, not in madness, but in abrupt non-existence, as if the warp itself were forgetting how to receive the dead. In the deepest vaults beneath Mars, an ancient noosphere archive unlocked itself without command. Forbidden equations scrolled across dormant screens, models of entropy that assumed death as a constant. Every projection collapsed once that constant was removed. Existence without death did not stabilize, it froze, then shattered. The Necrons moved next, not with armies, but with emissaries. A signal propagated across realities, bypassing warp and void alike. It carried no threat, no command, only an invitation. To the Eldar remnants, to the Mechanicus, to select inquisitors who understood too much to refuse. Even fragments of chaos listened, sensing a shift that could starve them into irrelevance. The meeting place was not a world. It was a silence. A region of space where stars had ceased nuclear fusion without explosion, hanging cold and dim like unlit lanterns. Here, physics hesitated. Here, the absence was strongest. At its center floated a Necron construct unlike any other, an impossible convergence engine built around containment fields older than the Imperium itself. Within it, dozens of Nightbringer shards thrashed in constrained harmony, their combined presence bending reality into a screaming tension. They had never been brought together like this before, because the risk was obvious. Unification meant awakening. The Necron Pharaon who presided over the convergence spoke not with authority, but with something dangerously close to humility. He explained what they had learned, what death had been, what it had become, what the galaxy had done to it. And then he revealed the final unbearable consequence. If death was restored incorrectly, if fear remained, if myth persisted, if the Nightbringer's lesson endured, then death would return sharper than ever, more absolute, more cruel. A mercy undone would become a purge. To heal death, the galaxy itself would have to let go of the Nightbringer's image. Let go of the face it had carved into every ending. That meant erasing it. Not destroying the shards, erasing the idea. Across the assembled minds, realization struck like a physical blow. You could not kill a concept through violence, only through forgetting. The shards sensed the shift immediately. Their thrashing slowed, not in weakness, in recognition. For the first time since the war in heaven, the Nightbringer understood it was being challenged on its own terms, not as a god, not as a monster, but as a memory. And it resisted. Across the galaxy, death cult symbols flared into activity. Ancient Necron weapons activated without command. Entire civilizations experienced sudden surges of terror, nightmares intensifying as the concept of death clung desperately to relevance. The Nightbringer did not scream, it reminded. Every fear of the dark, every funeral rite, every whispered prayer begging not to end. It flooded reality with itself. The convergence engine began to overload. Containment fields flickered. If the shards unified now, death would not merely return. It would reclaim the galaxy in a single, irreversible act. The Necron Farron stared into the storm of shadows and understood the final cruelty of the lesson. To heal death, someone would have to teach the galaxy how to stop fearing it. And there was only one force vast enough, stubborn enough, and present enough in every human mind to attempt such a thing: the Imperium. As warning sirens howled and reality warped inward, a transmission was prepared, one that would either save existence or strip meaning from it forever. The signal began to broadcast, and across the stars, the Nightbringer leaned closer, listening, as the galaxy held its breath. The signal did not roar across the void, it whispered. It passed through sanctioned relays, half-forgotten shrine transmitters, voxnets patched together with prayer and rust. It moved along the same arteries that carried hymns and casualty lists, ration orders and last words. It did not demand attention. It asked for it. Across a million worlds, voices changed. Not commands, not threats, not promises of salvation, stories. On hive worlds choking beneath smog and population, ecclesiarchs spoke of endings not as failure, but as completion. They spoke of candles burning down not in defeat, but in fulfillment of their purpose. Of lives measured not by length, but by meaning. On frontier agri-worlds, preachers told farmers that death was not theft, that the harvest did not mourn the grain it cut, because the grain had become something greater. On battlefields still echoing with gunfire, officers spoke quietly to the dying not of glory eternal, but of rest earned, of the right to end. The Imperium did what it had never done before. It reframed death, not as punishment, not as debt, not as terror, but as release. The Emperor's name was invoked not as a shield against dying, but as a witness to it, and something shifted. In the warp, the Astronomicon flared not brighter, but steadier. Its light lost its sharpness. It became warmer, less like a beacon screaming defiance into the abyss, more like a hearth fire guiding travelers home. Navigators felt it instantly, routes smoothed. Where once there had been abrupt terminations of nothingness, there was now passage quiet, complete passage. Souls began to arrive again. Not clawing, not screaming, but whole. Within the convergence engine, the shards convulsed. The Nightbringer recoiled not in pain, but in confusion. It had always fed on fear, on resistance, on the sharp edge of mortals, begging the universe not to take them. That struggle had given it definition, shape, hunger. Now, the fear was thinning, not disappearing, but softening. The shards attempted to compensate, amplifying terror, projecting images into mortal minds, skeletal figures, endless voids, the finality of oblivion. But the response was different now. People still feared death, but they no longer worshipped that fear. They did not kneel to it. They acknowledged it and let it pass. Inside the engine, containment fields stabilized for the first time since activation. Reality stopped screaming. The shards' synchronization faltered, their resonance interrupted by something they could not consume: acceptance. The Necron Farron watched in stillness as data streamed across his vision. The absence zones were shrinking, not collapsing, healing. Slowly, imperfectly, but undeniably. Death was beginning to flow again. But the cost arrived immediately. Astropaths burned out by the thousands, their minds reduced to ash as they carried the message farther than flesh was meant to reach. Choirs collapsed in unison, not screaming, but smiling faintly as they died, finally feeling the end arrive properly. On Terra, the golden throne surged, then dimmed. Not failing, adjusting. For a heartbeat that lasted an eternity, the Emperor's presence shifted. Those sensitive enough felt it, not command, not wrath, but acknowledgement. As if something ancient and weary approved, the Nightbringer understood then. This was not an attack. It was erasure by irrelevance. It lashed out. The shards forced synchronization one final time, dragging themselves toward unity through sheer conceptual inertia. Space bent inward, time stretched thin. Every being present felt the weight of inevitability press against their thoughts. Death tried to reclaim its face. The Necron Farron acted. He disengaged the final failsafe, not to destroy the shards, but to open the engine completely. He removed the last barriers between them and the universe, not to unleash the Nightbringer, but to expose it, stripped of fear, stripped of myth, stripped of reverence. The shards spilled into reality as shadows without substance, immense but unfocused. They reached for meaning and found none, their blade-shaped outlines blurred, their silhouettes fractured. Without fear to define it, death had no form. The Nightbringer did not die. It dissolved, not into nothing, into everywhere. Death ceased to be a figure. It became a process again. A transition. A door without a face behind it. Across the galaxy, the dreams changed. The shadow still appeared, but now it turned away. The blade lowered. The eclipse lifted, revealing not light, but quiet. People still died, but their deaths completed something instead of interrupting it. On the mining world where the first scream had once sounded, grass began to grow in the cracks of vitrified stone. No miracle, no blessing, just time allowed to function. The Necron Farron watched the last readings settle into stability. His kind had not regained their souls. They had not been forgiven, but they had repaired what they had broken. For the first time since biotransference, the Necrons were no longer custodians of an unending silence. They were witnesses to an ending. As the convergence engine powered down, the Farron felt something unfamiliar, not emotion, but resolution. A sense that a story had reached its final line. Across the stars, the broadcast faded. Shrines fell quiet. Battlefields cooled. Grief returned, not sharp, not hollow, but real. Death no longer spoke. It listened. And in that listening, the galaxy found room to breathe again, as the echoes of the Nightbringer finally gently fell silent. The universe did not celebrate. There were no trumpets in the void, no sudden flowering of light, no proclamation carved into the stars. Reality simply settled, like dust after a long collapse. Like water after a storm passes and the surface becomes smooth enough to reflect the sky again, life continued. That, more than anything, was the miracle. On worlds that had gone silent, people returned, not resurrected, not restored, but remembered. Names were spoken again, graves mattered again. Tears, when they came, felt complete. Grief no longer echoed endlessly into nothing. It arrived, stayed, and then slowly moved on. Death had resumed its place. Not above life, not beneath it. Beside it. The warp adjusted over centuries, not days. Its tides calmed where they had once screamed. Demons still prowled, gods still schemed, but the absence was gone. Souls passed through again, not as fuel torn away, but as travelers finishing a journey. Even chaos, unknowingly, adapted, fed now by lives fully lived instead of deaths violently stolen. On Terra, the Golden Throne endured. The Emperor did not rise, he did not speak. He did not need to. His light became quieter, more constant. Less a cry of defiance against extinction, more a promise that meaning could survive it. The Imperium did not become kinder overnight. Wars still burned, worlds still fell. But something subtle changed in the hearts of its people. They no longer fought only to delay death. They fought to earn their ending. Among the Necrons, silence took on a new quality. Not the hollow silence of emptiness, but the measured quiet of something finally complete. Tomb worlds entered stasis again, but not from fear of the galaxy. From acceptance that their task was done. The shards were gone, not imprisoned, not shattered, but dispersed into irrelevance. The Nightbringer's shadow no longer loomed behind every ending. Its face faded from myth, from nightmare, from instinct. Children still learned of death, but they did not learn to see it as a monster. Necron historians recorded the final data logs of the convergence engine and sealed them away forever. No dynasty claimed victory. No monument was raised. To do so would have been to mythologize the act, and myth was the seed of the problem. The Necrons returned to what they had always been best at, waiting. But now, they waited without listening for whispers in the dark. On the mining world where it had all begun, the last remnants of Imperial quarantine were lifted. Explorators noted simple things in their reports: soil chemistry improving, atmospheric balance stabilizing, life behaving normally, no curse, no blessing, just time allowed to move forward. A traveler stood on a ridge overlooking the old excavation site and watched the sunset, an ordinary star dipping below an ordinary horizon. There was nothing special about it. And that was enough, because the universe had learned something it had forgotten long ago. That death does not give life meaning by threatening it. It gives life meaning by completing it. The Nightbringer had once taught the galaxy to fear the end. That fear had shaped gods, wars, empires, and nightmares. But in the end, fear proved to be a poor teacher. It carved deep scars, but taught nothing about living. Acceptance did what conquest never could. It healed the space between beginning and ending. Some truths are not meant to be embodied. Some forces lose their power the moment we stop giving them a face. Death does not need a voice. It does not need a blade. It does not need to speak. It only needs to be allowed. And so the galaxy turns on, scarred but breathing, carrying its countless stories toward their natural conclusions, each one finite, each one irreplaceable, each one meaningful precisely because it will end. If death is inevitable, what matters more, how long we run from it, or how fully we walk toward it? If this story stayed with you, if it made you pause, think, or feel something in the quiet after the last words, then let others find it too. Like the video, share it, and leave a comment with your thoughts, because stories, like lives, matter most when they're remembered.